How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you once again. Tonight, I'm joined by the lovely and talented Karol Markowicz. She was a guest on Timcast IRL when I was still producing and doing guest coordination over there. She's a wonderful, entertaining guest with a lot of great ideas, and she just finished writing a book with Bethany Mandel called Stolen Youth. Karol, how are you doing? What have you been up to?
Oh, doing great. Thank you for having me on. Really nice to see you.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you again as well. I see there is a thriving colony of people down in Florida having a great time and all hanging out together, which is awesome. So tell us about this book. What do you get into in that?
It's really about the cultural revolution happening in the country right now and how it affects children. You know, we call it wokeness, you can call it leftism, you can call it any number of things, but it is not a new concept where the far left forces conformity on the rest of us and specifically targets children for indoctrination. And what we looked at in the first chapter, we opened with a history chapter and how these totalitarian societies of the past did the same thing to kids, tried to separate the family, the way that they got to the children, the way that they forced them to really, again, conform, behave, not step outside the lines, use the appropriate, prescribed language, not allow them to think outside of what the very narrow confines that they're allowed to think through were. And we wanted people to understand that this is something that has happened in societies for many, many generations. It is not a new concept. The new part of it is that it's happening in America. And the other new part of it is that we know it's happening. So all the people in Soviet Union or in China or in Cambodia or in any of the places that we talk about in the book, they can say, oh, we didn't know this was happening. This was kept from us. Well, if you have our book, you know it's happening. And there's no way to pretend it's not.
I'm really glad that you're bringing light to this because I think that a lot of people are kind of sheltered from it, which I'm kind of happy for them because being exposed to this stuff constantly is kind of depressing. It gets you down after a while. I see people on Twitter saying, why are we showing images of this stuff going on? And my answer is always simple. People don't believe it. They don't believe it's happening. You have to show them, and they would never believe that a scantily clad male is reading books to a group of 2- and 3-year-olds. That's absolutely beyond the pale.
Right. And the thing is that, like, when is the last time you even saw a book being involved in those performances, right? Like, they haven't read books in a long time. I hung out with a moderate Republican couple recently, and they were like, what's the big deal about Drag Queen Story Hour? They looked at it like it's a clown reading a book to kids. The idea is to get kids interested in literacy, and what's the big deal? And I was like, have you not seen any of the raunchy performances? And they hadn't. They had not. And so the thing is that it's hard to break through to people. And that's what I found in my writing over the years. Like, I had to repeat things many times, especially during COVID. I felt like, I just remember writing about the same things over and over. Like, we have to open the schools. We have to open the schools. We have to open the schools. And after each one, I'd get comments from people all over the country who would say, your schools aren't open yet? Like, yeah, our schools are not open yet. It is, end of 2021 and our schools are not open yet, or, end of the school year. So I think repetition is important. But the idea is that a lot of people just don't know. And so what Bethany and I tried to do with this book is compile all the stories. We did a lot of original reporting, but we also covered a lot of things that maybe stories that you may have heard in the news. Really compile it all, show the pattern, show who's funding it, and tell people what they can do, and basically take away the argument, I didn't know. You have to know.
Yes, 100%. I completely agree with you on that one. And I think that it's easy for us who live kind of swimming in this news stuff to just imagine that everyone knows about it. No, people are busy, right? You're a mother, and you know how easy it is to kind of get caught up in all the good parts of life, namely being a mom and helping kids with their kids stuff and doing fun stuff like going on outings and trying to stay organized and keep up with a busy life. Especially working people don't have time to figure this stuff out. So writing about it and repeating yourself, yes, even to the point of being like, oh my gosh, I've said this so many times before, is totally necessary. So your beat on COVID was that we just need to reopen the schools. What else did you talk about then?
It was about I the thing is, before COVID, I would not say that my beat was children. Like, I used to write about all kinds of things, and I think that what happened during COVID is I saw kids being damaged in a really unique way, and that there weren't a lot of voices speaking up for them. It was really hard to break through to people. So what we had was the marginalized people who like couldn't speak up for themselves, but then you had the people who knew something bad was happening, knew something bad was being done to the kids, whether it was closing the schools or keeping them masked way past the time that anybody should have been masked at all, but really severely masking them. So we moved to Florida in January 2022. My kids were in public school in New York City, still masking outside at that point. Like, it's hard to like really show people, and it was, again, people didn't want to believe it. Their lives had moved on. Maybe they didn't have kids, so they didn't know, or maybe they did have kids and they lived somewhere more normal than New York City. But New York wasn't even the worst of it. There were places that continued masking kids outdoors well past New York City. January 2022, when we make that move, my kids are eating lunch on the ground outside in Brooklyn, in 30 degrees, 40 degrees. And if they're allowed to move inside to the cafeteria during lunch, they're not allowed to speak at all. They would play movies for them, and they wouldn't allow them to talk to their friends at all. So my daughter, who was in a public middle school in New York City, she went to school in Manhattan. She'd prefer eating outside on the ground. She was like, at least I could talk to my friends. And, if I have to move inside, we have to sit in silence. I'd rather just be cold. So all of this damage was being done to kids, and I couldn't live with it. I couldn't live with just fixing it for my own children, which is what I saw a lot of my neighbors do. I saw a lot of people on the left fix things for their children, whether it was to put them in private school when the public schools were closed, or move them temporarily to like their country home or their beach home, and send them to school there, or get them a private tutor and form a pod, and not say one word for the people that couldn't do it. I grew up really poor in Brooklyn. I could not live with forgetting my community, where I came from, the people that couldn't afford to do the things that I could easily afford to do for my family. And so that became my beat. My beat was save the kids.
I love that so much. I feel like I bang this drum a lot, but maybe it's just mostly to Andy because I was raised working class too. So we were very lucky. I had 5 siblings, and we were still a single income household,
Mm-hmm.
which was really a huge blessing. So I kind of thought that would be possible for my future too, but apparently not to be the case. But I digress. I worked for the first part. Like, I worked on my feet in hospitals and in nursing homes and in people's homes, taking care of them. And I really cherish now looking back on that and knowing what it's like that gives you a great deal of empathy. And I'm concerned for the people who don't have to deal with that. And in fact, I really hope that my kids will have to go through the exact same thing. Like, you should struggle. And this is another thing that I talk about a lot. You should struggle. You should. It makes you into a better person. It makes you more compassionate. It makes you more empathetic. It makes you more willing to listen when people have real complaints. And that's so missing in our society. So
it's hard. It's really hard to pass that to your children. I say this, from my experience also. I've written about it before, like growing up poor and raising, rich kids. Like, we're not like, super rich, but we have everything that we need.
Right.
And just the idea that like they can, when we're out and they want a drink, it's like, oh, let's buy you a drink. Like, it's not like, wait, you have to wait till they get home to have that drink. And just so many things that like they just can't possibly understand. I try to tell them the stories. I try to pass it along in that way. But, part of growing up poor is wanting better for your own kids.
Yeah.
So it's a really tough dance. And it's one that I think about and write about a lot.
Yeah, I tweeted a while ago. I was like, I'm so torn between wanting the world to be so much better for my kids and wanting them to have to struggle in similar ways I did, because that's what made me into the person I am now. And I wouldn't change it for the world, even though at the time it was super hard. Right. But so did it surprise you that your lefty neighbors in New York did not want to be more empathetic to other people, since that's basically their beat? They talk about that all the time: compassion, empathy, inclusion, all that stuff.
Equity.
Yes.
Where was the equity?
Yeah, exactly.
It did surprise me. I know that sounds naive, but I really thought that these people would fight for the people who couldn't fight for themselves, the people who had to go to work every day. It was just so shocking to me during like the early days of the pandemic, where, it was like, this is great. We could just stay home and order Uber Eats. And I was like, who's delivering this Uber Eats to?
Right.
Like, what do you imagine is happening out there? And I really, yeah, we had planned to live in Brooklyn forever. I was raised in
Yeah.
Brooklyn. My husband was raised in Queens. We are two lifelong New Yorkers. We're both immigrants. And New York, we had achieved our New York dream. We lived in Park Slope, which is a very left, but very beautiful, safe neighborhood. We had a house. It was just, we really had achieved what we had always dreamed of. And that COVID really broke us. It broke our impression of the city that we loved so much. And I know I wrote about this a lot at the time, and afterwards I wrote about moving to Florida a lot. But it was really tough to watch our neighbors not care. It wasn't like, yay, we win the political battle of caring. Like, I literally was disappointed in them. I couldn't believe that they didn't want schools to open. I couldn't believe that they were like going out to like dinner, and their grandparents were going out to dinner, and the kids were eating on the ground, and that nobody had a problem with that. I thought of these people, if misguided and wrong, yes, but I always thought of them as smart and compassionate. And I saw them for the first time as morons who had no compassion for anybody else, like couldn't think through the whole masking outside thing, just followed orders blindly, and didn't have a word to say for anybody who didn't have the privilege that they had.
That's such a hard thing to realize, right? Because I know that I especially, and I think a lot of women, to be fair, really want to believe that everyone is basically good and we're all basically compassionate, and we'll be there for each other if we need each other. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. And I know it's hard to say, but I'm kind of glad that COVID kind of shook people out of some of that belief, because it sounds hard to say, and I don't want to lose our shared humanity, but we need to know what people are like, right? We need to recognize that these people wouldn't stick up for us if we needed them to.
Yeah.
It's so sad, and that's heartbreaking. I understand. But then you guys moved to Florida, and it's like the sun came out. So what you guys are like living the American dream now in Florida. How's that going for you?
It's amazing. I can't overstate it. It has been a incredible transition for us. But first of all, neither my husband and I have ever lived anywhere normal. We have never lived anywhere where things function, or people respond to your, needs, or just where you expect things to work. Like, again, we're lifelong New Yorkers. We just, the homeless guy crapping next to you is just part of the tapestry, part of the tapestry of your city. And, we didn't know that we could live somewhere where that's not the case. And so one of the main things is I was so worried about my kids towards the end there. And it's not that I'm not worried about them now. And it's not that I'm like, oh, there's no wokeness in their schools here. And look, it's a lot less. But I worry about them so much less here. And I worry about their just quality of life so much less here. And they won't do stupid things here, like make your kids sit on the ground because, they can't eat inside. They just didn't do any of that, and they won't do that. And so when people say to me, like, you can't move somewhere for a politician, because look, it is under, Governor Ron DeSantis's leadership that Florida became this like beacon of sanity during the pandemic. Yes, absolutely. But it wasn't just him. I've met people on the left here who thought we were insane in New York. Like, it's just, it's the Floridians have a normalcy to them that it was completely lacking in New York City, and lacking in so many blue places that, when I have friends visit, like when Bethany visits from Maryland, or my friend Mary Catherine Ham was here recently from Virginia, it's like, I tell them, I know that you, like me, I'm talking to them, have never lived anywhere normal. And I cannot tell you how amazing that is. It's really magical.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I came from a place that was reddish, then purplish, and now blue. And that was a hard transition to watch. But overall, things there worked as well, for the most part, you wouldn't
Right.
be seeing all this homelessness up close until they went blue. I just
Right.
remember
Where is it?
I was in Colorado.
Oh, I knew it was Colorado.
Yeah,
Where I
yeah.
like I could just
S-
guess, but
I
where?
was from Colorado Springs.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's
I was
south
just
of
there.
Denver.
I
Right. Oh,
was
cool.
just
Very cool. That's
there.
right. You were at the Broadmoor.
Right. I was at the
I
Broadmoor.
remember
But
seeing
my
that.
other thing is I actually lived in Colorado Springs for about a month in 2004 on the Bush campaign.
Oh,
Actually,
wow.
I was there for a different campaign, but then the Bush campaign, I ended up moving to Durango. So I spent some time in Colorado. Colorado is what I consider the example of what happens when you go blue. And Colorado
Yeah.
Springs was this beautiful, safe, gorgeous, little town when I lived there in 2004. And when I was there recently, it was homeless shanties and the weird pride flags on every restaurant, like, and every one of those flags is like different, and they're
Yeah.
not
I know. It's
like
kind of
they're
sad.
all kind of adding something to the mix. And it wasn't nearly what it was 20 years ago, and
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy.
It is hard, and that is especially hard to watch. I recount often what it was like for me to go back to Denver for the last time, and it was San Francisco of the Rockies. It really was,
Right.
because they had legalized magic mushrooms and it did not improve things. It made things way worse. And I get into this sometimes with my libertarian friends and my husband. I'm like, I don't know
Right.
about this legalization of this stuff, because part of this went downhill in Colorado once we legalized marijuana, and then all these people came in looking for marijuana jobs
Right.
who that didn't exist. There were way more people than there were marijuanas, and so yeah. And
Yeah. No,
Andy's pointing.
it is something that I definitely like. I think that I always thought, well, you know what? I would say that I thought drug legalization was a great idea until I went to Amsterdam in like my late teens, early 20s. And it was like such a druggy capital that I no longer saw legalization as like the path. Look, decriminalization, do I think like you should be going to jail if you smoke weed? Like, no.
Right.
But what's happening in these city centers is open, blatant drug use. And like, even like potheads I know are just, they're like, it stinks everywhere. And that's like just weed. What about
Right.
the rest of the drugs that are being used out in the open? And the way that they keep moving to, this is okay, and we're going to help them use drugs, we're going to like make it safer for these people to use drugs. Like, who do you think you're attracting to your city when you do that?
Right. Right. And that's an excellent question. So there is a verse in the Bible that talks about how everything is permissible, but not everything is good. And I think that's such a good principle to use when it comes to that kind of like encouraging this kind of wanton use of these
Right.
ridiculous chemicals. I think
Yep.
at the end of the day, what we need is cultural reform so that people don't feel a need to get addicted to these kind of things. But that's my
Right.
answer to everything. I think the solution is to start at the bottom and work your way up and encourage people
Yeah.
to have families, have kids,
Hmm.
get married, find good
That's
work,
my
find
beat.
meaning. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that
Mhm.
way you won't want to do things like crazy hard drugs, and that will kind of free you from that grasp. And then
Right.
you won't be involved with alcoholism, you won't be hooked on any of these internet things, God
Yeah. It
forbid.
turns out that the things that we used to do, like foster community and encourage people to have families, all of that worked. And
Yes.
that we're doing something entirely different and new now. It is part of this whole cultural revolution. It's like saying you don't need a family to be happy. Well, you kind of do. Like the happiness levels of people who have families are far higher than people who don't. You don't need religion to be happy. Well, no, that's not true either. Like religion, actually, people who follow a religion are happier. People who have a religious community, far happier. So many things that we just discarded without questioning have turned out to be a disaster for us societally. And a lot of what I say to people is, okay, you can't change culture overnight, but you can affect your family, and you
Yes.
can tell your kids what your values are. And just speaking those values is such a big deal that people just don't do it. They don't tell kids, this is what we believe, this is what we stand for, these are the concepts that we consider important in this family. I don't think there's anything wrong, and I've been saying this a lot lately, but I don't think there's anything wrong with telling your kids, I'd like you to follow the religion that we're following in our home. I would like for you to get married, and I would like for you to have children. And these are all normal things that parents have said to kids for generations. And for some reason, we're not allowed to say this to them anymore.
Yeah, that's so strange to me. I saw Millie Bobby Brown. I don't know. She was part of Stranger Things, I think. She just got engaged and she's 19. And a lot of comments, a lot of feedback on that is, you're too young. What are you doing? You have to discover yourself. And I'm like, no, there are lots of women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are saying, man, things kind of dry out by the time you get to 35 and 40. Like, the dating scene is pretty much gone. Your possibility of having kids kind of drops off. And it's not something that we can keep pushing off. Like, this is one of the things that's making women very unhappy.
Right.
And I love how you brought it full circle, because you're correct that this is a part of the cultural revolution we're seeing. They need to undermine the nuclear family, because people who are isolated and people who don't have family and community structure are much easier to.
That's it.
Right. They're easier to radicalize.
They're easier to control.
Yes.
They're easier to convince. They're easier to indoctrinate. And that's absolutely what's happening here.
So
Millie Bobby Brown is marrying Bon Jovi's son.
Oh, wow.
Bon Jovi is one of like the few Hollywood celebrities who's been married to like his high school sweetheart since, you know, the beginning. And they're still married as far as I know. And, you know, it's a rarity in Hollywood, and it worked for them. And, you know, good luck to Millie Bobby Brown, and I don't know what his first name is,
her
but
fiance,
Bon Jovi.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love to see it. And I also love people who have that legacy of married parents. My parents are still married now, I think nearly 40 years after their, you know, obviously since they got married. And so are my husband's parents. And so I'm really optimistic. I'm like, there's a really strong ethic of working on something instead of discarding it and moving in a different direction that I think we see all the time. So is there, do you think that the solution do you think that let me see if I can phrase this correctly. Do you think that the antidote to this ridiculous cultural revolution is going to come from Florida or places like Florida?
It will somewhat, because I feel like Florida has formed a defense against this kind of thing. Again, my two sons are in public school here. My daughter's in private school, and the public schools have just the DeSantis, you know, wall around them, where they're not allowed to discuss so many nonsense topics in schools. Doesn't mean they don't try. I haven't had an issue yet at all, and that's, you know, for me, I pick up on every like. And my older two kids are, I call them the woke police. My youngest is 7. He's still like, you know, half puppy. But the older two are always like, is this something? Is this something? You know, and they know. So I would say that, like, just the fact that you could send your kids to school here and not worry that they're going to sneak in a CRT example in the math equations. I know that doesn't seem like a lot. But the truth is that all of these little things are made to brainwash your kids. And it's not, you can look at it like, oh, it's only one thing, but it's like a million things. So I wrote about the changing of the lyrics in Little Mermaid in the new live action. They're changing the lyrics because how do we know that Ariel wanted to be kissed by the prince?
Gosh, yeah.
The whole plot of the movie is how she gave up her voice to go chase after this guy. Pretty sure she wants him to kiss her, but whatever. Like, but, you know, and people will say like, "Oh, what's the big deal? It's just a Little Mermaid lyric. What do you care?" And I'll say, you know, yeah, it's just the Little Mermaid lyric, and it's just the Roald Dahl books that they're changing. And Dr. Seuss probably didn't want his books published anyway. And, you know, this is the language that we are using now. If you say I'm not racist, that means you're racist, because we say anti-racist now. And you must use the correct prescribed language or you're out. And I tweeted a friend of ours, you know, mutual friend of ours, Michael Malice, but he made the greatest point to me, and we quote this in the book, which is the jargon changes all the time, and they change the language constantly to keep the in-group in. And as the jargon spreads, they have to change it again to see who's back in the in-group. And it's the way that they know who's with them just by the words that you use. So if you use folks, that's how this conversation began today on Twitter. But if you use folks and you add an X at the end, you're in. But if you're not, then you're still using it the racist K way, which doesn't even make sense. How is folks a problem? How is it a gendered thing at all? So you have these little examples that combine to form society and to form culture. And so if you're saying like, oh, what's the big deal about this little example? It's a million little examples. It's millions of little ways that they are trying to change our culture, and we have to stop them.
Well, yes, it is a snowflake and an avalanche, and it's so good to see both the cultural from the ground up and then the political from the top down kind of converging in Florida and making what you describe as a wall.
Yeah.
You mentioned just a minute ago, and I really want to get back to because this is super important to my husband and me, that your kids will go in and say, wait, is this woke? Is this something that I should be looking for?
Yes,
you have done the groundwork, which is something I think that most parents haven't.
Right. Well, we absolutely had to. We were going to spend our lives in Brooklyn, and I was going to provide my kids the foundation at home. And just because I can be less aware of it now, or I can worry about it less in Florida, doesn't mean that I'm not going to worry about it, going forward. Look, DeSantis, just got reelected. He has, one term. Who knows if, what happens during that one term left. And then, you never know what's going to happen. Colorado is the example that I think of. You never know what happens to a state. So you can't count on politicians. They're great. Yeah. It's awesome. I love the DeSantis administration. I love the work that they do. But you can't count on politicians. You have to provide the defense in your home. And in our book, Bethany and I go through our different paths. So at the end of Stolen Youth, we paint the picture of what we do in our individual families. And again, for me, I send my kids out into the world and I provide them with the foundation at home to fight back. Bethany homeschools her 6 kids. She pre-reads the books. She pre-watches the movies. She really doesn't allow too much culture in. That's a way to do it. That's not how we do it.
Right.
And so she and I provide sort of the answers for people who want to take either one of these paths. But one thing Bethany will say is that no matter how much she preserves her family unit inside the home, no matter how much she shelters them from the world, she still has to take them to the pediatrician. And as we lay out in the book, wokeness has permeated everything, including the doctor's office. And stuff like that. The doctor's office is really the scariest chapter to me because Bethany can't protect them. She cannot, envelop her family and not have them go to the doctor. It's just something she can't do.
Right. And that's a great point too, because to me, that is especially scary because I happen to know there was a case, well, this wasn't specifically the doctor's office, but there was a case in Maine where a mother found out that the school, I don't know if you're familiar with this case, they found out a school was offering her daughter accessories to transition to the opposing gender. And when she removed her daughter to homeschool her, the counselor from the school called Child Protective Services on her. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is one of the most bone-chilling examples of what can happen. That's scary, right?
What's really scary is I don't know that example, but I have like a dozen examples just like it. We have examples in the book that are just like it. This is happening all over the country. And, when we started this conversation, I said it's very hard to convince people that the cultural revolution is happening. A lot of the time, it's easier for me to convince people in blue areas because they see it.
Right.
In red areas, they do feel that sense of security. They think that they don't have anything to worry about. So there's a story out of Long Island a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where a teacher transitioned a kid in the classroom to boy pronouns, a 4th grader, 9 years old, to boy pronouns, started using a boy name. And what was really telling to me about that story, yes, it happened in New York State, so okay, blue state, but it happened in a red hamlet on Long Island, in a red town, in a red county. It was not somewhere that was like woke and crazy and you expect that kind of thing. It was somewhere you really don't expect it. And so I need people to understand that this is happening everywhere. Cultural revolutions are not just happening in our cities, and they're not just happening in blue states. They're happening at a school near you. When you look at the TikTok videos, like the libs of TikTok, those schools are often in towns you haven't heard of, and
Yep.
they're not just in San Francisco, and they're not just in New York City. They're everywhere. And so what we trace in Stolen Youth is that, again, the wokeness is everywhere. So it starts in teachers' colleges, where the teachers themselves are being indoctrinated. They're learning Marxist texts, and then they're taking this information and spreading out across the country at a school near you. And people need to take it seriously and fast.
I'm so glad you guys went right to the heart of the problem, because there were people in West Virginia
Mhm.
who were coasting along. They thought everything was fine.
Yes.
And then they elected a new school board. And lo and behold, there were a whole bunch of Marxists in their midst, and they had no idea. Like, they didn't, because you don't have to apparently declare party affiliation when you run for one of those more
Right.
minor offices. So
Mhm.
they get in. And then it's like, what do we do? And I think that living
Right.
in these areas makes people kind of, it makes them
Safe.
more,
Feel
yeah,
safe. Yeah.
they feel safe.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's a dangerous place to be, ironically enough. Feeling safe is one of the most
Right.
dangerous places to
Yes.
be, because
Yes.
then they
Which is,
slip through.
so what the thing that I say about it is, look, I sleep better, in Florida, worrying less about my kids, but it doesn't mean my guard is down. It doesn't mean
Right.
that I'm not going to be looking out for 2 + 2 could sometimes equal 5. I am. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to keep laying down the foundation at home, which is the most important part. The telling the kids what our values are, showing them those values, living the values, and really just having an open conversation with them all the time. One example that happened post book, but our middle son is really into history, watches like these history YouTube videos and whatever. And we heard him recently, like we just are like, he's watching something and we're like listening in the background. And it's like, the US Senate is so unfair because all the states that have small populations have the same number of senators as the big populations. And it's like, okay, this is a video trying to indoctrinate you to a leftist point of view. So turn it off and let's talk about it. And then, do my husband and I love talking to a 10-year-old about like our
Senate.
governmental system and
Yeah.
how like, just the way that it's designed and what does make it fair and the way the House of Representatives balances the Senate. It's not a conversation we love having. It's like, it's a little, but you have
Tedious,
to
yeah.
do it. You have to do it because these forces of indoctrination, even on something like that, they're aiming at your kid. They're trying to make sure that kid grows up and votes the way that they want them to.
Yes, correct. Does it ever blow your mind? This is something I was talking about yesterday. Does it ever just stun you, the way that people go and they decide to have children, which good, that's great, that's awesome. I love the idea of more people in the world. They have children and then they hand them directly over to the state, and then they choose to give them technology in any of the time that they're at home. And it's like, what are you doing? Are you a parent to that
Yeah,
child? What are you doing with them? Does that frustrate you at all?
it does, especially since the pandemic. I feel like the tech thing has gotten out of control.
Mm,
Look, I'm not going to say that when my kids were small, we didn't give them an iPhone to make it through a dinner at a restaurant sometimes. And it was very occasional. But now I'm watching families come into restaurants and literally hand the kids the iPads, like from the beginning. Like, okay,
right.
if your kid starts melting down, you pull out your, phone or iPad and you let them, like if you're up to dessert and you give them the last 5 minutes or whatever. But I'm now watching it happen everywhere. They get to the beach, they give the kid an iPad. They're at a park, the kid's on an iPad. I don't get it. And I think that, and I've written about this, and, I get people who write back to me and are like, maybe you just have easy kids. Like, well, maybe I have easy kids because I didn't allow them to just do whatever they wanted. And
Right.
maybe my kids are easier because we had hard times in the beginning. Maybe we listened to them cry for a minute. Maybe that was okay. So I've seen the technology thing get far out of control since the pandemic. And, the things that parents say to me, like, oh, my kid has TikTok and we just can't stop them. And I'm like, I stop them. I
You're a
say no.
parent. Yeah.
Yeah, I have 13, 10, and 7. And I would say that my 7 is most interested in TikTok because the older girls on his bus are scrolling on TikTok and he loves the ladies. So he like wants to hang out with them and make TikTok videos. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, just not happening. So you can say no, you can be the parent. It's not like heroin. Like, that's the thing that people are always like, it's like an addiction like heroin. I'm like, no, people like sell their bodies to get heroin. Your kid is not going to be selling their body to get on TikTok. Like, relax.
Right. Right. That is a good way to think of it, because I think people go too far in the opposite direction. They're like, oh, it's the end of the world if my kid has a TikTok account. Not necessarily, and especially not if you've armed them to look out for this
Right.
stuff.
Look,
Right.
again, I don't even judge people who allow their kids on TikTok. I don't like the argument, I can't stop them. Like, yes, you can. Yes, you
Yeah.
can. Like, if you allow your kid on TikTok and you oversee and whatever, good, go for it, whatever. But the idea of I can't do anything about it, all of their friends are on TikTok, obviously I have to let them do it too. No.
Nah, not at all. Well, my parents always used to tell us, and you probably say something similar to your kids, that we will have a lot of friends in our life, but we will only have two parents. And they're like, okay, we're not going to be your friends, at least not when you're younger. Hopefully,
Yeah.
when you're older, we'll be able to be great friends, which is, I think, a great idea. But when you are a kid, there is such a clear role between parent and child, and you can be on wonderful terms with them. You can be on friendly terms with them. You can be on open communication terms. That's fantastic and honestly ideal. But at the end of the
Yeah,
day, you aren't just a friend. You are the person who can and will say no if that's what they need to hear.
that's right.
And I think that people are kind of missing that. And I feel like there's this added element in today's world of concern about, again, CPS, if your kids decide that they want to throw a fit over something that you told them no over and just say, my parents do this, or make something up and cause all kinds of harm. How do you kind of combat that? Or is that something you've ever been concerned about?
I've never been concerned about that. I mean, a kid throwing a fit, and what are they going to call? The kid's going to call CPS as the concern. I mean, good luck, kid.
Yeah.
Good luck in your new
Right.
foster home.
Right.
No, I don't know. I've seen government agencies weaponized against people, against parents. That should be a concern. But the idea that CPS has time to be checking if the parent is like, if the kid's throwing a fit over not getting YouTube or whatever, like, I feel like they're too busy for that. I don't know. You should be on guard, just because don't trust the government.
Yeah. Yeah, for
But
sure.
not so on guard that you're afraid of your own child, or telling your kid no.
Yeah, I completely understand that for sure. Well, so my parents kind of took Bethany's approach with raising their kids, and I want to give like the 2020 vision of that, because now that I'm in my 30s, I'm 31, I look back on my youth, and I felt very isolated because we lived in the country and we didn't go to public school. So I felt like I didn't have any friends, which was already hard when I was young. Although I did have at the time 4 and then 5 siblings. So there was plenty of stuff going on. We were always playing outside, and we knew that if we went inside and told mom something along the very foolish lines of, Mom, I'm bored, she's going to give us chores to do.
Yeah,
Horrible plan. We stayed outside all day. We're like, I'm not going inside. I don't want to do any of that dumb stuff that mom wants me to do. But then as I was growing too, I missed out on big chunks of the culture that now everyone my age is like, oh yeah, do you remember this show? Do you remember this movie? And I'm like, if the question for me is, have you seen this movie? For me, the answer is no, I haven't seen it. I saw like 4 things when I was growing up, because we had that very sheltered, very structured approach to movies and stuff. And I feel like that makes me kind of lacking. And my dad's like, most modern movies are trash or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but everyone knows it. And it gives us that kind of commonality, that common ground to discuss. And I'm like, I feel like I'm missing that.
I'm wondering what Bethany would say about it. I feel like she would say that, look, it's not that she's not giving her kids any culture. It's just that she's monitoring what that culture is. And that she's very involved in making sure that they don't see anything that she finds inappropriate. I think the other thing that she would say is that when we were kids, when you were a child, it was much less likely that some diversity coordinator at a top media company was sneaking in references for you that would, that would specifically target you as a child. And so your parents wouldn't notice it or whatever. So I think what's happening right now is really insidious. And she would say that she likes her kids being protected from that. She likes not worrying about it. She'll say that she loves Robin Williams is their favorite actor.
Right.
They watch old movies, and that's where she lets them kind of absorb culture, but that she likes not having to worry about the indoctrination being aimed at her kids.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I fully understand too now, especially where my parents were coming from. Even though there wasn't this really insidious stuff leveled at kids, there
Mhm.
still were themes in there that were not positive. In fact, anytime we'd watch a Disney movie, my parents would go out of their way to tell us, you don't want to follow your heart. You don't want to do what feels good all the time. And I was like, yeah,
Right.
okay, we get it. But now I'm like, yeah, I
That's
think that's
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's correct. And I think I feel like I'm seeing girls my age, women my age trying to do that. And I'm like, no, that's going to leave you lonely and childless. And you're going to be so miserable and sad just because you did what felt right at the time instead of what your principles and your upbringing told you to do. So there's
Right.
a lot of good in there. But at the same time, I always kind of felt like I could be, around more people and soaking up more of the culture. So
Yeah.
there's such a
You
fine
were
line.
homeschooled.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was
Mhm.
homeschooled. Yeah, so which I appreciated. I felt like my education was perfectly fine compared to everybody else. And even
Mhm.
now, as I look back at like the number of friends I have, I also look at other millennials who are complaining about not having friends. And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, I really feel like I didn't actually miss out on anything here because apparently having a bunch of kids friends in public school doesn't really make a difference when you grow up now. So,
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't talk to anybody that I was friends with in like
right.
elementary school or middle
Right,
school.
right, right. So
Um,
it
yeah.
was hard though at the time, and I was just now I just wanna let people know how it could possibly affect their kids if that's something that they want to consider. Now it sounds like Bethany's still letting her kids watch movies, which is great, and I really want to talk to her about this in more depth too
Right.
because I find
She has
homeschooling
a
so
very, I mean, we have a very different perspectives, but we come to the same protect your children point. It
yes.
just, the way that your family chooses to do it might be different than the way my family chooses to do it.
I feel like your book gives so much hope too because you are coming from different angles. This isn't just like, someone who comes down and says you can only homeschool, there are no other options, or
Right,
you can
right, right.
only, or you can public school and you should, otherwise your kids won't get the education they need.
Yeah,
You need both approaches because you want to give
absolutely.
people the full truth. So I
Yeah.
noticed that a lot more people are homeschooling. Are you seeing more of this in Florida, or are people still perfectly comfortable sending their kids to public school?
I was seeing it a lot in New York before I left. I was just seeing people pull their kids out of public. I don't know. I'd love to see like actual numbers on it, but I just suddenly knew, families that were homeschooling for the first time ever in places like Brooklyn and Manhattan. And it might have been because of the whole masking, eating on the ground, all of that. Maybe that moment has passed, but look, the numbers across the country are homeschooling is just booming, and I get it. You want to pull your kids out of these woke institutions that are damaging them. I would say the real hopeful thing in our book is that we point out again and again how unpopular these ideas are. It seems like they're everywhere. It seems like they have captured, the majority of the country. The truth is, like 7% of the country refers to themselves as very liberal, and when you get to like the real woke stuff, that number is even lower. And so what you have is a real minority who have captured our institutions and organizations through force, through this forced conformity that they're pushing on us. And they have managed to influence the culture through being loud and through actually threatening people and saying, people got fired during the COVID pandemic for saying things that were entirely normal and rational and that we now accept to be the truth. And so, I think the point of hope is that if you are someone that doesn't want your kids being indoctrinated into this cult, don't worry because you are part of the majority. You just need to like be brave and find those people and speak out together and fight together.
Yeah, 100%. And that is super encouraging. So, one of the examples that I always remind people of is the NHL Pride Night. So, I don't know if you remember the
Oh
most
yeah,
recent
yeah,
cases.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but there were two players who just said, no, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't
Great.
jive with my faith, right? And now the NHL is considering canceling it altogether. I was actually going to see if I could find an update on that. That's from the end of March. But they're like, we're thinking about getting rid of this altogether. And I was like, look, it only took two people saying, no, I'm
Right.
not interested, and for the NHL to see the ridiculous backlash and for them to be like, there's something that we probably shouldn't be meddling in here. Like, we shouldn't be this is playing with fire. And
Yeah.
I think that it's in their best interest to realize that, because if they're smart about who their demographic is, right? Because not a bunch of pansies watch hockey.
Yeah, look, that is the thing to me, is that, like, first of all, Twitter's not real life. Second of
Right.
all, three people being mad about something on Twitter is not a thing, and like not an important enough reason to change your whatever it is you're doing. Um, and I think that these companies are doing damage to themselves. I mean, the fact that Dylan Mulvaney has become the face of like every single brand, I mean, that cannot be good for business. Like, even let's say she was just some model, some, you know, beautiful model who they've decided is now the person on every single brand, like Bud Light and Nike and you know, Olay and just a bunch of other companies are using her, you know, her using Dylan Mulvaney as the face of their company. And so, like, you know, even if it were just some beautiful model that they were using, it just oversaturation, overexposure. They would never do that. They would never allow one model to represent all of them. And yet they're making this exception for Dylan Mulvaney because they think that they have to. They think that they have to incorporate a trans person into their brand, and Dylan Mulvaney is the one.
Dylan is such an interesting case because for all of the publicity and all of the ad deals and all of the fame and attention and spotlight, Dylan is open about the fact that no one's interested in dating them. And that's
Right.
hard to watch. And I hope that people are listening to that, because when you tell someone, when you give them incentive to attempt to become a victim or to represent a victim class, it's not going to make their lives better. They are being used as a pawn. And the sooner they realize that, the better. So I hope that Dylan will be an example to people who might try to follow along and do the same thing and just be like, this person's very unhappy. Like, they feel very empty. They can't find someone to spend their life with, which is sad for anyone. I've always felt a great deal of sympathy for Dylan, because Dylan seems incredibly, maybe narcissistic, but very, very insecure and in search of fulfillment and happiness, just like anyone. Now, they've chosen to go about it in a very wrong way, but it works. And you really can't argue with the fact that it's been working really well for Dylan, which is a problem as we see it incentivizing other people.
Mm-hmm.
But it just strikes me as just crushingly empty. And I think that hopefully other people will start to notice that too. Do you see people starting to wake up to some of the wokeness and push back on it?
Some of it, yes, but they're still afraid of coming off as, you know, anti-trans or racist or whatever, and I think that fear is what keeps people in line. I think that you have to, again, be brave and say what you want to say and say what you mean, and not use the only language that you're allowed to use. You know, one thing I like to point out is that I think the word trans is going to be considered anti-trans very soon. If you differentiate a girl from a trans girl, well, what kind of transphobe are you? And so the language will keep changing, and it's up to you to say, I'm not doing this. I am not allowing my language to change because you're trying to maintain control here. I do see like the school board fights were very encouraging to me, but it gets exhausting and people give up, and there's so much that I think still needs to be done culturally before this fight can even be considered, you know, halfway won. And like the medical chapter again is the really scary one to me, because I think people will die because of this woke contagion that we've allowed to permeate our medical schools. If you need to write an essay on how you will push, and this is a true story, in order to get into medical school, you have to write an essay on how you will be a big proponent of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and what you're going to do to foster that culture. You're not getting the best doctors. You're getting the doctor that can write the essay that, you know, they know what you want them to say. And there's so many examples of that. But an example that Bethany gives is, you know, they have a conference every year where they talk about best practices for premature babies. Like, so they have the top people, and they have the 4 doctors who are the absolute best in NICU care, and they are on a stage and they discuss like what they've learned in the last year, and this, you know, changes all the time, and they have new best practices every year. And then somebody noticed that all 4 doctors were white men, and they had to get, you know, a more diverse group in. And, you know, if we're trying to save premature babies, at that point, are you like, I don't want a white male doctor. I would
Of
like some
course
other
not.
race or a female or whatever. No, you want the best. And the fact that they had to change that they did bring in, you know, doctors of other shades and genders, and they're no longer the best. So
Mm.
people will die because of stuff like that. And it's not like, it's not just the changing of the Little Mermaid lyrics. It's everything. It's everywhere, and you have to fight it everywhere. And it gets exhausting, but people need to keep going, because this is how we lose our culture. This is how we lose our country.
I think you're right. And it's very, very concerning to me as someone who's working on building my family to consider that the people who be taking care of me and my future children wouldn't be the best. That's incredibly
Right.
upsetting. And it's so interesting that they do this in such a massive scale that it's impossible to blame
Yeah.
any one person, right?
Right.
I think that's
Right.
part of it, because they're
Hmm.
like, well, you had the most diverse doctors. I'm like, I just wanted the best doctors.
Right. Right. I don't care if they're diverse. I don't
Right.
care if they look like me. Like, I don't. That doesn't mean that not do anything for me.
Right.
That's the other thing. It's like when you know, when they do hiring practices and they're like, well, don't you need to see someone who looks like you in order to know you can do it? I'm like, no, I know I can do it anyway.
Of
Like,
course. Yeah.
just because like it's you know, a man instead of a woman, like I still believe I can do it. I don't know, like, what it's like, they would never say that to a man, right? They would never say that to a white man, like, well, you don't have any white men to look up to here, therefore you don't think you can do it. Like, you know, you can anyway.
Right. But that's because you and I were raised with this understanding that we have shared humanity, that we're
Hmm.
all people, that we're all individuals, that it doesn't really matter if it's a man or a woman interviewing us, because
Right.
we are still humans at the end of the day. They'll
Mhm.
give us the benefit of the doubt if we need it, and they will also recognize our actual accomplishments. When we get rid of our shared humanity, and then we also get rid of the importance of meritocracy, we lose that. And then, like you said, people are 100% at risk. But because it's so widespread, like I was mentioning, you won't be able to blame it on any one person, which I think is exactly what they're going for. My
Right.
baby died in the NICU because why? Because this
Right.
wasn't done. Who's
Right.
responsible for that? No one knows,
You're
you know?
absolutely right. It starts at the top, but then the people that actually end up feeling it will never know who's responsible for it.
Right. And that is just occurring to me during this podcast, and it's very disturbing. So let's try
Mhm.
to leave people with like a really good silver lining. You know, you mentioned the hope of people starting to wake up and take action against this. What's another
Yeah.
good little nugget we can leave people with?
I would say that, you know, I don't know if this is a positive, or maybe it's a little bit of a negative, but if you are somewhere where you feel like you can't be yourself, where you can't raise your family the way that you want to raise your family, where you feel a lot of social pressure to conform, your options are fight or leave. And, you know, for me, I fought in New York as long as I could, but moving has been just the greatest thing ever. It was so it improved so much about our lives so quickly. And it doesn't necessarily have to be to another state, although Florida obviously is getting a lot of people who are making the same realization that we made. It might be to the next town, it might be to another neighborhood, but life is short. Childhood is really short, and you need to do what you need to do for yourself and for your family. I think that we've changed our kids' lives just immeasurably for the better with this move. And, you know, the idea that we were going to be lifelong New Yorkers, it was hard to let go of. It was. We really were committed to that picture. But sometimes you need to change the picture in order to better your life. And so a lot of what we say in this book is you need to find like-minded people, you need to join, you need to have community. All of that makes you happier, and it will make your life better. And so moving is hard, but I would say that that's another positive, is that moving is often going to be a great move for you.
That's really exciting. And one of the things I've been trying to pitch encouragingly to my small audience is that I don't think there's going to be a civil war. I think there's going to be a great sort where people tend to move to be closer to people with whom they agree for the most
It's
part.
happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's I view that as a huge positive. And I spent, 2 years listening to the constant drumbeat of there's going to be a civil war. There's nothing we can do to escape it. Get out of big cities, which I also disagree with, because we can't just retreat. Conservatives have done nothing but retreat for so long, and it's put us in this position.
Mm-hmm.
So there's both a case to be made to stay where you are and fight. But like you did, I love the idea of just saying, you know what? I've fought for as long as I can. I'm not being able to make the kind of impact that I wanted to. So we're going to cut our losses and we're going to sacrifice some of our own dreams so that our children can have a better upbringing. Even though this was like the peak of everything my husband and I wanted, this was our American dream.
Right.
It's okay. Our kids are more important.
More important.
And
sure.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really respect and appreciate that. And I'm so hopeful that more people will do that. And I was seeing a study from The Hill. I just saw a headline go by about how a vast majority or a majority of undergrad students say they won't even go to the states with whom they politically disagree. And I was like, okay, good, great. Fine. Don't move there. Don't go there. Right. And every time I see a hit piece come out on Florida, I'm just like, stay away. Yeah. Nobody should move to Florida.
We're like, don't come.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was the same. Part of what happened in Colorado was Californians came in huge influxes. Yeah. Right. And I was just like, please stop. Please don't come to Colorado. You don't want to be here. It's horrible. But then, they made it a tiny California, unfortunately. Okay. So hopefully people will move towards places with people they agree with in a majority. And that's kind of what we're already seeing happen. So how is Stolen Youth doing on Amazon?
Great. Awesome. It's a bestseller. We, would love that people are reading it and sharing it. And it really has been one of the bright spots for me. The book is a bummer. It is. It has so many just negative stories. And but one of the bright spots for me is how many people are engaged in this fight because of this book. And that we have brought a perspective to parents on what they can do for their families, and not just parents. We heard from non-parents also, because again, it is a cultural revolution. Yes. Just because they're aiming it at kids doesn't mean that it doesn't involve you. If you don't have kids, it does. To paraphrase, you might not be interested in the cultural revolution, but the cultural revolution is interested in you. So.
Indeed, it is. And then just because I am such a big fan of the parallel economy, like with Public Square, where besides Amazon can people find the book? Are there local booksellers?
Local booksellers, absolutely. Daily Wire Books website.
Perfect.
And anywhere that books are sold.
That's right. You guys went through Daily Wire. That's absolutely perfect, because they are playing also such a big role in the parallel economy. That's absolutely ideal. Well, I'm so excited for you, Karol. I'm so happy that you guys are thriving in Florida. I'm looking forward. Visit. Yeah, we will have to pop down sometime. I'm really, really looking forward to that too. Although I hear it gets relatively warm there over the course of the summer. We might have to kind of fine tune when we visit. I love
the summer heat. It's really not that bad. I don't know. Living in New York City, it also would get really hot, and nobody had a pool, and everybody here has a pool, and it's perfect. It's ocean, and it's great.
I love that so much. I have to ask before we go: have you seen an alligator yet?
Only on purpose.
Okay. So you had to go out of your way to find it.
A tour of the Everglades.
That's amazing.
There's an alligator. The kids.
That's how you want to see him, not in your pool. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, again, coming from Brooklyn, it has been way more animals than I am used to. Often I'll be driving and I'll see an animal on the road. I'm like, what is that?
What is that thing?
But it's I know the gator thing. It's so funny that I haven't seen one except on purpose.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. I did see from your Twitter that you encountered an intruder in your home, that you had to dispatch it with a broom or something. You had to sweep them out the door.
Oh my God, that was terrifying. Our next door neighbor came over and stuck a box on the snake and then slid another box under him
Yeah.
and moved him right out. It
Yeah,
was
it's like with a spider, right?
Second, and look, we knew it wasn't a poisonous snake like right away, but that did not make me feel better.
It didn't help.
I was really worried about that snake like slithering away and getting lost in my house, and then we have to move.
Oh yeah, of course. Have to burn the house down.
Right, and it was because my sons had left the door to the garage open for a whole day, and that's how you get a snake in your house.
Yep, that's the way to go. Well, I imagine that pet doors aren't very popular down in Florida. That makes sense to me.
Pets, yeah.
Yeah.
Your kids, that's
right. Yeah, exactly. That's enough of a pet. Well, Karol, it's been wonderful talking to you. Where can people find you across the various platforms?
I'm at KAROL on Twitter, and just Karol in public, KAROL in public on Instagram. I should probably make it one thing on all, but
I love that you were able to get like your first name on Twitter.
Yeah, well,
That's so cool.
It wasn't because I was so early on Twitter. It's just because in the earlier days of Twitter, they used to respond to your emails. So I sent them an email like, hey, nobody's using this account, but it's in use. Like, can I have it? And they're like, yeah, here.
That's amazing. Oh, good for you.
And now it's like, hello, I'm getting death threats. Like, I don't hear you. What are you saying?
I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a problem. Well, thank you so much for talking, Karol. I had a wonderful time. So refreshing to hear about all the good stuff happening in Florida. So excited for the success of your book. You and Bethany did great work over there. And for my audience, thank you all for joining us once again. Until next time. Bye, guys. How's it going?